philosophers, but I don't believe in things that aren't proven, that we have no evidence of, but sometimes I have to tell you that I thank you for showing me that there are logical people in the world, that man can live by reason, that reason is a virtue, that selfishness is a virtue, that I have a right to what I earn, to what I create, to what I know to be true. And it's nice to know that even when I'm surrounded by the unthinking masses, that there are people out there who hold their minds as their highest value out there somewhere in the world. And the fact that they exist helps me through my days. Yes, thank you for giving me the answers I've been looking for, but maybe you could explain to me how to get through the days when no one understands you and you have to accept less than perfection after you've seen the purity and the clarity of the thinking mind. And this first one is called Lawyering Can Lead to Leading the Country. Let's link U.S. agriculture to lawyers to the U.S. presidency. Now, back in the early 1800s, all farming was done by hand, but Cyrus McCormick saw his father work on a horse-drawn reaper, and he could speed up the crop collection and eventually to over like 100-fold. When his father died, he moved to Chicago in 1847 when his brother, through companies, were able to then, quote-unquote, mass-produce reapers for farmers. Now, although others claimed patents to this at the time, that was when Cyrus McCormick saw John Henry Manny of Rockford, Illinois. He was also making a reaper. Now, the Manny reaper even beat Cyrus McCormick's version during the Pirk's Exposition of 1855, forcing McCormick to file a lawsuit against Manny for the patent infringement. The trial was first in Chicago and had prominent lawyers on both sides, but Manny's lawyer team needed a local, so they hired the Illinois lawyer, Abraham Lincoln, for their group. And they were sure that he didn't have the right kind of expertise. Manny's lawyer, Edwin M. Stanton, even said that Lincoln was a quote-unquote damned log-armed ape. And although Lincoln was there, he didn't actually contribute much of anything at all. And when the trial then moved to Cincinnati, Ohio, the lawyers there just decided that they wouldn't even tell Lincoln. So when Lincoln heard of the move, he thought, wait a minute, I should be there. So off he went, and he found the trial, but all the other lawyers there just ignored him. So all this time, Lincoln watched this trial that he didn't contribute to, this trial that Manny actually won, and Lincoln thought, hey, I should really surge ahead with this lawyering thing. And after a few years, he, well, you know, became the President of the United States. That lawyer, Stanton, ripped on Lincoln back in the day, but after Lincoln became president, he actually chose Stanton as his Secretary of War. Because back in the day, people didn't automatically choose cronies that were just like them to serve their own selfish interests to join them, but they actually chose people that were so incredibly different from them, so they could have a well-rounded view on how to serve their country. Novel idea, isn't it, to make the effort to work with the opposite side of the government, to make the government actually work. Is that amazing? And they were like, all right, I finally actually got there, and now I'm going to pick people that just picked on me and hated me, and I would have it in our cabinet, versus, oh, the people that were running against me, but we're on our same side, and we'll just have more people that are just like us running for, you know, being our cabinet and filling everything up. It's insane. All right, I'll do a more serious one. This last one's called Underscore the Battles. Deadline, November 1860. Abraham Lincoln was elected the 16th President of the United States of America. Among Democrats, Lincoln won over other Democrats, including Stephen Douglas, who first fought Lincoln in the Lincoln-Douglas debates, which was, guess what, all about slavery, which, of course, Lincoln was against. But over the course of Lincoln's run for presidency, you might be vaguely aware that he was assassinated. But what you might not know is that the attempts on his life actually started before he even became the President of the United States. Because the southern states, the ones that wanted to, the ones that wanted to secede, weren't fond of Lincoln, and Lincoln knew this, so he thought he would start to actually go out on a whistle-stop train tour to Washington, D.C. But fearing his safety along the way, he hired Alan Pinkerton and his private secretary as his private secretary. And the security team then was finding out that a lot of people along the way wanted Lincoln dead. The security team then went to Baltimore, one of these stops on Lincoln's whistle-stop tour, and they stayed at the Barnum Hotel and tried to act Southern to try to infiltrate Southerners there. And then they found out that Cipriano Ferradini, a beady-eyed Corsican barber who planned to kill Lincoln. So he was actually all in a worry, and Lincoln is taking this train in his tour, and they were going to stop at Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and Pinkerton told them that they have to speed their trip and skip through so they could escape this plan to actually assassinate him in Maryland. So what did they do? They decided then to actually conceal him. This is a funny one. They removed that hat that Lincoln is so well known for, and then they wrapped him up in a shawl and placed him there as an invalid brother. And they said they needed to get them on the train, and this is the way they thought they would be able to pass Baltimore without getting caught before anyone would actually be able to assassinate him the next day, or before the scheduled assassination was supposed to happen. But in the middle of the night, while in Baltimore, the train stops. Why is the train stopped? They wondered. And then they found out that Baltimore had a sound ordinance. They still do, by the way. So that the trains could not run for hours. Lincoln was a sitting duck in this station whose engines weren't allowed to run at this hour. So they did the only thing they thought they could do. They got horses. And they literally hooked the train car up to horses, and they snuck out of town quiet as a mouse. Or, I guess, quiet as horses, which may be more quiet than a locomotive train. And yeah, they got through Baltimore and stopped at Baltimore's Camden Street station to join the train in Washington, D.C., which was nowhere to be found. At this point, they could hear the people all outside talking about how terrible Lincoln was and how the South will rise. And Pinkerton is stunned that Lincoln is sitting here listening to all of these people that want him killed. But thank goodness, the Washington train eventually showed up, and at 6 a.m., February 23rd, Abraham Lincoln arrived in Washington, D.C., averting the first assassination attempt of his life. This was a perfect underscore for the battles that Abraham Lincoln had to endure. He shouldered a century's burden, a burden for first declaring some human beings as anything but human beings. But we may now look and find it impossible to believe that humans were bought and sold, tortured in a hot box for days. We hear the speech of having a dream right now for unity, and we wonder, and on some levels we may still think there's a dream. But after blacks have run companies in the U.S., and after having actually run the presidency, we all must think that there's nothing any of us can't do. So this is the fear that founded from servitude and slavery, and that is no longer a part of our vocabulary. But when it was the norm, imagine the uphill battle one man had to face to try to convince an entire nation that their property isn't property at all, and living, breathing human beings. What an uphill battle. And oh, how we paid for his beliefs. Thank you.